Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's fine now. It's supposed to rain in a couple hours. The Thomas Jefferson report can say it's about 79 degrees presently. And the humidity is around 68. And the wind is supposed to be 5 miles an hour, but it's as still as could be as far as I could tell. There are several things going on, but trying to choose the overarching one when you're a person who obsesses on politics, it's difficult to get away from Trump. And I thought the latest smash to his face was the gathering that Oprah hosted, with men and women attending virtually, and the floor filled with most of it was women and men, all coming together in support of Kamala Harris. I know they raised a lot of money. I know there were a lot of people who watched. And Oprah over the years has gotten such a skill at bringing complex subjects together and interviewing people. And I thought this was no exception to that. And I think anybody who watched it had a certain joy about the entire event and is counting the days until we win the election. And Meryl Streep, she sat there watching, and you could see her from time to time on the big jumbo TVs around the room. She asked the question that we're beginning to ask, because we know it's not a frivolous question. And that is, what will happen when we win? What will Trump do then? Can we expect a rerun of what he did after the last election, 2020, when he lost? And plainly, that's a fair question. And it was, I suppose if it became a serious and extended discussion, there would be buzzkill. But it was appropriate to raise it because we have to think about it. Because you and I and others are going to be in these precincts in the states that are particularly considered battleground and narrow and necessary for an electoral victory. And we have to mentally understand what's at risk and what could be done. Now, I didn't think Kamala wanted to discuss it. I don't mean she was dodging it, but I thought she was searching for a neat summary that would assure us that such events are being anticipated. Now, in fact, I'm going to discuss in a moment, I suppose, what's going on in Georgia, in which exactly that is going on. There's a lawsuit that's going to be heard October the 1st. And it's about local districts being allowed to withhold certification. So you see the point, you see the interference there. So it's also, to be fair to everyone, a moving target that requires more than a 1 minute, 2 minute response. So Ms. Streep was spot on. No surprises there. This is an issue on the horizon, but we can't wait until it arrives to deal with it. I also think it's a tell about Trump. If you study and look for an understanding of the tactics and strategy of Trump, it seems as to remain visible while expecting to lose. So, for example, why would somebody go to New York and campaign? There's no way he's going to win there. He did it because of the TV market, and so that his supporters and others will see he's out there waving the flag. And he does all these stunts for the same reason, but they're not campaigning. They're not getting him votes. They're keeping his base together. He's trying to hold together a base And I don't know if he's decided he's not going to get more than his base, but he's certainly acting in a way that he leans upon that, I think, as a predicate for his failure to act like any other candidate would. And while he's doing that, Kamala and Tim are running off, campaigning in key states and trying to understand what can move the needle in their direction, and finding that the polls are rewarding Kamala for her debate performance, and there are vectors pushing in her direction, including the battleground states. They haven't, in some cases, broken out of the statistical tie, but they are giving her slight leads. Now, it's hard to vouch for polls if you haven't conducted them and prepared them and studied the sample and the probabilities and everything. But from a distance, I would recommend to you, if you want to spend some time seeing what it looks like is happening, is look at ABC's polling. They have, I think, the most sophisticated setup that incorporates all the polls with commentary and so forth and suggests the drift of what's going on. So you might look that up if you want to see what the polls are doing. But see, Trump sees these, and he sees his own internal polls, and he is appealing to the lowest denominator, even among his base, when he's talking about how they should get their hindquarters out of chairs, their fat hindquarters out of chairs, and they should go out and they should vote and stuff like that. When have you heard a presidential candidate say that and repeat it? I mean, it's one thing when the moment catches you or anger does, but he consciously chooses these things and is kind of tough love for his supporters. So, excuse me, there's a lot of no-see-ums out today. So I think Trump doesn't think he can win. And I think he thinks he's going to lose bigger than he did the last time, which is the way it should be. So what we have is, as an example, and a prominent one, because it's a battleground state, is Georgia. On Friday, there was testimony and 11 rules were proposed for the election on November the 5th. And the most controversial one, I suppose, is that there should be a hand count of every ballot. In other words, you vote, and you probably voted electronically. You probably filled in an oval shape, which can be scanned and read and make a tally, and those numbers are matched up with the numbers who came through and were identified before they voted. But they want to go another step, which usually doesn't happen unless there's a question about the election. So without waiting for the question, they want to scan all ballots. Now, there was some pettifoggery going on about what that meant. Did it just mean counting the ballots to see if they were the hard copy ballots, to see if they coincided with the number who voted? Well, they have other numbers they could do that with. And I'm not sure that that's really what they want to have happen, because I think they want to compare who voted for whom with the ballots. Now, each of these would take a lot of time and effort. They want to require 3 people to be present while it's going on. We can't lose sight of the fact that the ballots have been printed and the absentee ballots are going out. The entire operation is calculated to be chaotic, to cause chaos. and perhaps to push it as the deadlines fly by, when they must report it by state, when we have the Electoral College meet in December, when we have the Congress, the House and the Senate, to have the Vice President, which would be Kamala Harris, to certify to the bodies that the election result is what it is. Now, so what is going to happen here? Now, let's go down in the details a little bit, because this didn't happen without some planning. First of all, they removed Raffensperger from the state electoral board. Now, you may remember, he was the one who was being pushed in the last election by Trump to certify votes that would go to Trump, even though, in fact, in truth, they belonged to Biden, and gave him thousands of votes lead to win Georgia and ultimately the entire election. So they removed him, and they added 3 new members to the board, and these 3 were named by Trump at a rally and said they're great and they're going to do what they can for me and so forth, and that's what they've done. The arrogance of this chubby potentate is amazing for its clarity, its transparency, its exposition, as well as the fact that there isn't somebody pulling down the walls around this guy for what he's doing and saying. It's just, how this guy could be a bully is beyond me. He's a ridiculous individual with a substandard mind, a great instinct to do what's false and evil, but not always done well. And he is strolling around getting away with this. Now, the courts have said, federal court has said, that there should be a quiet period before an election, meaning 90 days. This is not 90 days. That's just one example of the difference. The board has no authority to pass these rules. The state attorney general and the governor have said so. Raffensperger has weighed in with his attack on their conduct. Their rules contradict other rules that are in place and that people have been trained on for this election. And the legislation should have had to be written by the legislature, not by this board. They don't have legislative making authority. This would cost a lot, and the personnel have not been hired to do this, assuming it did have any merit. And you may ask, so what's the politics of it besides its crashing and burning? Well, what if they could kill the ability to count the votes in Fulton and DeKalb County? Both counties were strong in making a difference in the last election. Fulton County is got a high percentage of blacks, as does DeKalb County. One can offset votes elsewhere if you're Kamala Harris by winning big there. Is that the strategy? Well, that's one possible strategy. But is the strategy that they were so populous, there's so many people in those counties, if we delay the votes in those precincts in those counties, then we have something that could take more than a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And we start getting to a point where, who knows, state courts, federal courts get involved, and we try to, exclude those votes. And then the remaining votes, presumably, went for Trump, and that's how he wins. Of course, these things are always dangerous because you never really know, but if they're doing this, they really think they know. In other words, they think they're going to lose if they don't cheat, as Trump would say, bigly. So we have that. Now, on top of all of these things, it is racist to be creating a rule that won't affect smaller precincts because they can do these hand counts if the hand counts were to stand and courts wouldn't shoot them down, which I think they will. And I have to come to another question about, are they in fact not just proposed, but did they approve them by a 3-2 vote? But we'll get to that in a moment. So there's an old case, Baker against Carr, and the court under Justice Brennan was considering whether or not they could interfere in an election. Now, if it was a political question, the court has felt very comfortably that they should not interfere. But they thought it was a constitutional question. Under the Establishment Clause was how one drew lines a violation of the 14th Amendment. In other words, one person, one vote. So if I'm taking away the votes of those in Fulton and DeKalb County, I'm taking away the right to one person, one vote. It's a constitutional issue. And so by the constitutional issue, we should prevail. And it's not a political question in which we're getting involved. But all the other things I mentioned, I think, will come to play. And I haven't heard anybody mention Baker against Carr. But certainly the reasoning there is very persuasive and should be seriously considered if we have to litigate this. Now I say, if we have to litigate this. Now I've saved for the last, although this is not as organized as all that, I've saved for the last because I think I read it the last in the news stories. And in the Washington Post, after talking about how there was a 3-2 vote and it was terrible and outrageous, at the end says there was a vote, or there was a decision not to go forward with the rules. And this happened Friday night. Now they convene again Monday, so I don't know if it'll go forward there. So what is our hope of winning this argument? Well, it goes to the state court, although I heard some commentators think it goes to the federal court. It does not go to the federal court. This is a state issue. That's not to say something wrong, improper, inappropriate will happen later. But the first step would be to take it to the court and have a hearing in the state trial court and then take it up. That will take some time, but it'll be on an expedited basis. And I expect there will be some of these simple rules. Too late, no authority, contradicted by other rules, a political bias, perhaps remove these 3 from the board, and so on. And lastly, maybe Baker against Carr for the reasons I said, because plainly this is aimed at the larger precincts and segments of the voting population with a hope to derailing the process and ending up, say, in Congress, having the Republican Congress choose who our president is. In any other country in the world, that would lead to revolution. In our country, if we're still working, the courts will settle it, and it will be settled the way I say. So, not that I have any control over it, but that's my... You take these LSATs supposedly to see if you can make comparisons between similar matters and thereby come up with a legal approach to every problem. And I've done a kind of a rough draft of that. So, you have to keep your eyes and ears open. Who knows what you'll hear or see on Election Day or before Election Day. And so for the time being, I say good evening to you from my Cathedral of Trees. Bye-bye.